now we're going to switching pace a little bit, and we're going into one of our guest speakers, who will be Deborah Sims, and I'll just give you a little bit of a rundown. She's our patient advocate, or Director of Patient Advocacy with Lymphoma Australia. So I'm very fortunate to be working quite closely with Deb on a number of projects. But I think it's really fantastic, and thank you for giving your time today to be able to talk about your story with CLL, and you've had a bit of a rocky road, which you'll go through in a moment, and I think you'll probably cover a lot of people's journeys, I think, in one story. But a little bit of a background about Deb. She's a journalist by trade, and was diagnosed with CLL, or chronic lymphocytic leukemia, for those that are unaware, in 2011. And CLL has actually been reclassified back in 2016 as a lymphoma, so hence a bit of a confusing name. But Deborah graduated from the University of Technology in Sydney with her bachelor's in communications, and majoring in Australian politics and investigative journalism. A career as a reporter and a newsreader in commercial radio in the northeast of England and Scotland followed, before she moved to London to work for recruiters. Sorry. Gosh.
Okay.
It's a better practice.
Don't need to read it all. Suffice to say, being a journalist has definitely helped me with my patient journey.
Exactly, and especially with our recent ASH interviews, which you might see on our online there for us. But I just want to say that you work with the BBC and done some fantastic work before moving back to Australia for the birth of your first child. And we'll see a lovely picture of the family shortly, I believe. So Deb is, apart from moving back to Australia, it's a bit rocky with having 3 children now. She works and raises awareness of the need for patients to have the appropriate access to clinical trials, and is on the government's blood cancer task force as well, which is a really important document to see where we're at and where we need to go in the way of blood cancer. And she's had lots of treatment as well, which I'm sure she'll give us a bit of a rundown with there. So she's gone through all sorts of chemos and maintenance therapies, and also oral therapies as well. I'll leave that for Deb to describe. And she's also currently on some novel therapies and looking at preparing for a CAR T. So welcome, Deb. I'll let you tell your story.
Yeah, I don't think I've got the technology to share my screen. I've just played around with it, and I think it'll be disaster. But thank you so much for having me and giving me the opportunity to tell my story again, because as you say, it crosses both the acute aggressive lymphomas and the indolent lymphomas. And I've been living with SLL, small lymphocytic lymphoma, which is also chronic lymphocytic leukemia, for 9.5 years now. Oh, you've frozen. Is that me or you? Oh, I hope it's not me. I'll keep going just in case it's not me.
It's me. It's myself.
Oh, okay. I've been living with SLL and CLL now for 9.5 years. So coming up to my 10th anniversary of having a pneumonia, which is when they discovered that I was really quite sick. I literally went from having pneumonia at 37 to being diagnosed with an incurable form of lymphoma at the age of 38. And the strange thing about CLL, and this is really covered very well for those of you with indolent lymphomas, it's covered really well in Lymphoma Australia's booklet, which I read recently. It's very, very strange to be told you have an incurable form of lymphoma that is most likely going to kill you, because as yet there is no cure, and then we're not going to treat you. And I spent a year in watch and wait, watch and worry, as a lot of us call it. And my children were very young. They were 7, 5 and 2, and I had all the how much do we tell the children, especially when I'm not having treatment, but I'm going to have treatment. And it was that whole real emotional battle. I mean, the day I was diagnosed, I'd had a little lump in my neck. I'd gone to the doctors, and it took a few months to find a diagnosis. And this is actually quite common with lymphoma. And I'm a member on the Lymphoma Down Under page, and you often see people not only having not been misdiagnosed, but not having a diagnosis for a long time, and that's difficult to deal with. And for me, 9 years ago, I had chemotherapy, and I had 3 cycles of the gold standard chemotherapy at the time, which actually is still frontline treatment for CLL these days. And I was supposed to get 2 to 5 years from that, and I got 6 months. And the disease really became very aggressive after chemotherapy. My neck was bigger than my head, and like so many people with lymphoma, it's weight loss and night sweats, and it's just a, you know, itchy skin, and you get sick pretty quickly. And for me, there wasn't at the time a clinical trial that I could get onto, so I was headed for what I'm sure some people have had on this call, a stem cell transplant. And while that can be potentially, it can give a long remission, as you all know, it's a very dangerous thing to have. And at the time that they were going to treat me with a transplant, I didn't have a great donor match, and I didn't have a sibling donor, and it was all just too scary for me. And I was very, very fortunate in that I went to America to look for a clinical trial, and that's why I'm so passionate about clinical trials. And I've got a little prop here, because I managed to get on, which one is it? Yes, and I've still got some, which I should have given back, but I can't, because it really, you know, these saved my life. This is venetoclax, and I got on a phase 1 trial of venetoclax in 2015, and I had to move to London to get onto this trial. And I spent 7 months in London on a trial of this, along with a new monoclonal antibody, which is now widely used in lymphoma, called obinutuzumab. And it took me from being really seriously ill to having no detectable disease. And at the time, my doctors couldn't have imagined that this drug could do that for me. And ironically, it wasn't, a lot of Australian research went into developing this drug. There were 90 patients on the first trial at the Peter Mac. I couldn't get onto the trial, and like so many patients, it's a very narrow band of people who can often get onto these trials. I think it's something like only 6% of terminally ill blood cancer patients do manage to access these medicines. But thankfully now, this drug, I was on it for 4 years. I relapsed on it last year, and because I'm one of the longest people ever to take it, it's you know, they're following me really closely to see what happens now. And now I'm on another drug, which is ibrutinib. Now this is hopefully will be frontline at some stage for CLL. Certainly Lymphoma Australia is campaigning for that, and venetoclax now is available for relapsed and refractory patients. So while my doctors don't believe I'm going to have a long remission from at this stage. I'm back in remission now, but I have to say it's an alarming experience to fall out of remission after 4 years, and suddenly, you know, that sort of Damocles that's always over our heads waiting for this cancer to come back, came back. And Donna and I were in Orlando at the time, weren't we, Donna? And I was there with big lumps in my neck and really getting quite scared. But ibrutinib is working. They're hoping I'll get 12 months out of it, but it means that I now have to have either a bone marrow transplant, or hopefully I'll get onto a CAR T trial. But CAR T is not approved for CLL yet, so I know it is for aggressive lymphomas, and my lymphoma is just an odd cat, and it likes to sort of play with me mentally on both fronts. I've been asked really to talk about the emotional impact of my journey. When I was diagnosed, I wanted to give up everything. I wanted to run away. I wanted to have start another life with my children, and, just hide. And I think I'm really, really pleased that I didn't give up work, and that I didn't give up being an active member of my community. Even now, even in these COVID days, I'm, the hair, the roots, everything, I've been isolated now for 8 weeks. I'm desperate to get back out there. And I think if I hadn't stayed active and I hadn't stayed working, or, you know, I always say to people who are older than me, if you're not working, volunteer or do something, because I think you can really get subsumed by this disease, especially when you've been living with it like me for a decade. I don't want cancer to define me, and I think having really good friends around you, having something day to day that is not cancer being your life is really, really important. And also, I think being informed, and as a journalist, I don't believe I would be here had I not advocated for myself. My doctors were wonderful, and they sort of humoured me when I went to look for a novel drug. But I do believe that if I'd had the transplant at the time I was meant to have it, I may not be here. And so I think always being informed about your disease, being aware of what clinical trials, and that's something Lymphoma Australia does so well, is that it really does promote clinical trials. It promotes novel therapies, because the only way we're in Australia under a public model health system, the only way we're going to get these new drugs initially is in clinical trials. So I think making sure you have a good doctor, that you, even if you can see an expert in your lymphoma and it's only once, if you can get a referral at the time of needing treatment and just get that second opinion, I think that's critical. And also try, I think the happiest I ever was in this whole 9.5 years was being told I had no detectable disease, which was back in 2016. And I'd been commuting to England, and I'd lived there, and I'd left my children. And I've celebrated, and I was so happy. But afterwards, I thought, you've got to ride the roller coaster at an even keel, because otherwise there's highs and lows all the way through. And living with any chronic illness, I suppose, is hard enough. But living with one that could kill you at any time is extraordinarily difficult. And also not being afraid to ask for help and ask for emotional support. I certainly, a couple of years ago, I found it really difficult. And ironically, it was when I had been able to get my drug here at the Peter Mac, and I didn't have to commute. And I commuted to England for 2.5 years, and I just suddenly collapsed. I really, all of a sudden, could not cope. And it was at that point that I went to see my doctor and said, okay, I know you talked about a counsellor, and I know you talked about putting me on some medication just to help me emotionally. I think it's time. And I have to say, I'm so pleased that I reached out, because everyone was seeing me as this sort of superhuman who was battling through. And you do put on a face, and I think it's really important for patients to reach out to each other, which is why the community groups that Lymphoma Dateline London website's really, really good. Although I often know I end up in conversations with people and I realise that we're all talking about different lymphomas in the same thread. So I know we're certainly trying to look at doing some sort of more targeted groups, so that CLL patients are only talking to CLL patients, and we all have shared experience on that front. And then for me, it's the added worry with children. My children they were 7, 5 and 2 when I was diagnosed, so now almost 16, 13 and 10. And my children have really suffered. They have grown up knowing mum could die. And despite my best efforts to try and shield them from this, it's been a really, really difficult thing for them to have to deal with. And it, I can't stand the fact that they've lived with that fear. In fact, I was talking to one of their teachers, and she was saying how amazing my children have coped with this whole transition to homeschooling that we're doing at the moment, and they're very, very happy. And she said she wonders whether it's because my children have had the rug pulled out from their whole world has changed several times. Their mum I left for England, I left them here, I had to move really quickly. And they're used to change, and so maybe that's a benefit that will come out of it, and maybe they'll be more emotionally resilient growing up. But I would much rather them not have had the experience. Now, I'm really happy to take any questions, because I realized I've waffled on, and I did have some photos, but basically it was me just sharing photos of children, and some really gross shots of my neck, which you're probably better off not seeing. But yeah, Donna, is there anything you think that I haven't covered, since you know my story so well?
Oh, look. Oh, oops, what I've just done then. Look, you yeah, you've had such a journey, and like, I know the short time I've known you, you've carried yourself in such a wonderful way, and it's being, you know, so selfless and being an advocate for other lymphoma patients. I think it's wonderful to hear your story, and I know it's tough to repeat all this.
I know, I found myself getting
I know, I felt like coming in a couple of times. So
yeah.
I'm sorry, and even though we're online, it's just it's hard. But no, I think you've covered that pretty well, and also the unknown and getting ready, as you mentioned, getting ready for the next, having always another plan and getting ready for the plan, and I think that's important for a lot of patients to know what that next plan is for them, and everyone's individual, and you mentioned that before too. 80 different subtypes of lymphoma, so that everyone's different, even with the same subtype, completely different journeys. And I know it's hard for people to look online and seeing other people's stories, but just going back to your doctor and having a good relationship and asking those questions is very, very important. Hey, but I think you covered most of it. A lot.
Okay, good.
Great. Look, I'm interested in knowing some of the things that, you know, what has really helped you, your main pillars that have helped you through your whole journey.
And you don't want me to say alcohol at this stage?
Oh, it helps. Whatever works.
No.
Probably.
Dear. Yeah, I can say, you'll kill me. Venetoclax goes much better with alcohol than ibrutinib. That is definitely, you know, never drink and take drugs, children.
Is anyone there?
No. Living. I'd say living has helped me, because I always think that, you know, we're, in a lot of respects, we're very fortunate. We know that life is short. We know that we may not be here forever. And so I've had the best 9 years. I've had the best holidays. I've got no superannuation whatsoever. If I grow old, I'll be very poor, but I don't care. I've cherished every day. And I'm not saying I'm not still a grouchy mum or whatever, but gosh, you appreciate life a lot more. And I often think if everyone could have just a touch of cancer, not that it will kill them, but just a touch, you see the world in a whole new way. I changed jobs. I don't put up with stress. I know stress is incredibly bad for me, so I'm very, very careful just not to do things that make me unhappy. And I actually said that on a patient forum, do things that make you happy. And I realized I was hating my job at that moment. So I went in the next day and resigned. And I was like, here's me taking my own advice.
Yeah, you don't waste time, I guess, and knowing what, realizing what the good things are. Like you mentioned your family and your partner, you just have such a good relationship with them, and I think you feel that that's probably enhanced that because of that. What's going on in the background.
And also I think I've got a really tight group of CLL friends from all around the world, because when I was diagnosed, I was 38, mum of 3, and I just wanted to find other women with children who were facing what I was dealing with. And so I've got a really close friend in Dublin now, and I've got one in Toronto, and I've got one in San Diego, and they're all women in the same situation as me. So I think reaching out, and actually, even though it's strange, because then you're learning other people have access to different medicine, and that can make you a bit angry if we don't have access, but that sort of made me quite passionate about, knocking heads together in Canberra and working with Sharon and yourself to really promote the good therapies that we have and the good clinical trials. And actually, one good thing about this weird time we're in is that actually things that, like telehealth, things that we've been campaigning for people, especially people who live in regional Australia, to be able to get better access to healthcare and specialists. Well, you know, someone in Dubbo can have an appointment at the Peter Mac at the moment.
Yeah.
You know, without flying. So I just think there's some really good things that have come out of this time.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's probably going to change a lot of the way that we operate as health professionals. You don't always need to see them face to face, do you? And you know, imagine the amount of time you've spent in hospital waiting rooms to see your doctor, just for a quick hi, usually a social chat. And
I get patients. I've been so public with my story. I get patients coming up to me in doctors' waiting rooms. It's great. Always say hi to me if you see me at the Peter Mac.
Oh, excellent. So, is there any, just going back onto the kids, is there anything that you would recommend on how to talk to your kids about such a serious topic? Because I work quite with diagram.
Don't know if I've got it right.
Right.
You know, my teenagers are both struggling, but I don't know if that's just because they're teenagers and boys or what. But someone advised me they lost their mum when she was a friend of mine. She lost her mum when she was 15 to lung cancer, or that she could die. So she had no preparation for it. And I think I've always tried, and on that basis, I've always tried to be honest with the children within the bounds of what they can cope with. So I've never said to them, I could die, but they've known when I'm on a clinical trial, it's because I'm sick and I need, you know, when they were young, it was there's something wrong with my blood. If I get tired, they get worried. Like even, you know, I try not to say I'm tired because they start thinking the cancer's back. My little girl will always say, Mummy, if you take me tablets every single day. And that's sort of, yeah, it's hard. I don't know. I've got no advice, to be honest, because I don't think I've got it right. I think I've tried to be honest with them, try to shield them as much as possible, and just love them as much as I can. And yesterday I had a lovely Mother's Day. Just them, I'm a single mum, as you know, and just them with me, and they were making a fuss all day.
Nice.
Great.
Yeah, they're not. Your kids are just delightful. I've met them all. I was going to share a photo that you shared with me before. I managed to get that.
Oh yeah.
So this is the
well done. So this is me when you even put it on a slide. Look at you. Well done. So this was me in London. So this was, and gosh, you know, I think my face is bigger now. I'd love to blame the drugs for all the weight I've put on, but I don't think it's Ibrutinib. I think it's not exercising. But that's how old my kids were when I left them. So I was in London for 7 months. This is actually Hampton Court Palace. And their father brought them over to see me, and I was just starting to get better. So, you know, it's sort of my neck, you can still see there's a little lump there, but not much. But they were little, and it was so hard to be away from them. But I wouldn't be here.
Yeah. How old's Cam's in that 15, 16 now, isn't he?
Yeah. So he's about 11 there, I think. Yeah. How long? It's 2015. Gosh, 5 years. Isn't time flying? It's incredible. And now, I'll talk to Michael after this, but I'm probably going, well, hopefully, fingers crossed, going to start screening for CAR-T in June. As people will know, CAR-T is obviously quite a cutting edge therapy. It's not approved yet for CLL, but hopefully there will be a trial, or there is a trial, there was a trial. We'll have to see what's happening with COVID. But certainly I'm trying to get onto a trial because Ibrutinib will hold the course, but after Ibrutinib, I'm running out of drugs. Which is a shame.
A lot of them, yeah. This is a couple of questions. This one's from Peter. Did your doctor recommend the clinical trial rather than stem cell, or?
No, so that was my point at the time, Peter. Thanks for the question. Really good question. I was never told about clinical trials. Now, I was a patient at Cabrini in Melbourne. I loved my haematologist. She was great, and she referred me to Contam at the Peter Mac. And David Rich at the Royal Melbourne. They just decided that I was going to have a stem cell transplant. So I was really on track for that. And I was young, it did make sense. But no one had mentioned clinical trials. And when I went to America, and it was actually because I'd read about Frank Walker, chemo brain. Who am I thinking of?
Oh,
Ron Walker, thank you. Ron Walker. It's either chemo brain or old age, one of the two. I am growing grey now that I'm not getting my highlights done. Yeah, I read about him in the AFR having done a clinical trial of Keytruda in California, and then coming back to Australia and getting that put on, helping campaigns to get that put on the PBS. And I thought, well, maybe there's something in America for me. And I literally, being a bossy journalist, I emailed Tom Kipps at University of California, San Diego, one of the best CLL experts in the world, and he agreed to see me. And I went out 2 weeks later and he saw me and he charged me $400, and he told me about this clinical trial. And it's a long story, but I bumped into a British doctor and he said, have you got your British passport? And I said, yes. And he said, if you move to London, I can get you on this trial. And I came back to Australia and found out that one of the drugs venetoclax, had been in a monotherapy trial here that had closed while I was relapsing. So I was a little bit disappointed that I thought I might have been able to get it had I known about it. But there are worse places to have to move to than London for 7 months.
That's true. Just a question for Patricia. What was a key piece of information or a message that you have received while undergoing treatment that has made the biggest impact? Maybe about what sort of information?
It's a really, really good question. Wow. I've never been asked that. So it made me... what's had the biggest impact? Well, probably reading the AFR about Ron Walker definitely changed the course of all my treatment, because I would not have gone to America, and I didn't know you could take the superannuation out. So I took I applied, filled in the form online. I didn't have any money, and I took out my superannuation and went to America, and went and had a hospital appointment. And I think Tom Kipps saying, don't let them transplant you. There are drugs, there are novel therapies, and my blog is ABT and me, because when I got onto this drug that we can now get in Australia, it was called ABT 199, and I was only one of the first 49 people. I think I was patient 49 on the trial. It was a phase 1 trial. So I think being told not to do what I was going to do here, and hey, my doctors still say, well, Deb, if you'd had the transplant, you might not still be messing around with all these drugs. But for me, my children are older now. If things don't go well with the next form of treatment, they'll remember me. They'll, there's been a lot of good has come over the past few years.
I guess you just don't know, and so many changes, especially in SLL, CLL, and other different types of lymphomas, and there've been 15 new PBS listings in the last 2 years. So things are changing very rapidly, and it's very hard us as professionals to keep up to date with the latest. So can't constantly ask. We'll send you the information that we can, but it just be reminded it changes so fast. So if you were 5 years ago, you would have got completely different.
And even CAR T. I mean, if you look at how quickly we're getting CAR T now. And okay, there's still a long way to go to have that as a safe, and it's borderline now whether I should do CAR T or stem cell. Like, it'll be ironic if 9 years on I end up doing what I've tried to not do. But
it's come through a lot quicker. Now it seems quite slow for many, but it is very quick coming through compared to, say, a lot of other treatments, even stem cells. I remember when that was coming out quite a while ago. That's how old I am. Cases asked, have you had any big digestive and sleep issues during this time as a result of the treatment that you've had, especially with the venetoclax, I suppose? And so how you manage these things?
Yeah, venetoclax is known to cause distress. I actually didn't realise apart from having a bit of an icky tummy for the whole time I was on it wasn't too bad. It was only when I came, it's a bit like lymphoma itself, the indolent lymphoma, that you progressively get sicker and you don't realize how sick you are until you have treatment and you're well again. I think with venetoclax, I didn't actually realize it was upsetting my gut so much. And I think because I'd had it in combination with obinutuzumab over 6 months, that when I went down to the monotherapy for 3.5 years, I just felt better, so it didn't worry me too much. But since I've changed drugs in January, I've put on 10 kilos and I don't have an icky tummy anymore. So obviously venetoclax was quite good for maintaining a, healthy weight range.
Way of doing it.
Yeah, but I've been very, very fortunate. Like, I've tolerated even FCR, the chemotherapy, and I still say to people, if they've got the right markers, really listen to your doctor if they're telling you this is the best thing for you, because that can be a 6-month treatment, and with my leukemia, you never need treatment again. Now, for someone that's been under permanent treatment, I have stopped treatment for about a month in the whole, since relapsing 6 months after FCR. I'm on my 4th line of treatment, and goodness knows not that I'm worrying about long-term side effects. Someone said to me they didn't want to have chemo because they're worried about secondary cancers. And I was like, oh, really? No, let's just worry about one cancer at a time. Worry about the one that is trying to kill you now.
Yeah.
and try not to try. And actually the booklet says this. I just read our booklet again. It's really and the people say try and live in the present. Gosh, it is important too. If I start thinking what's going to happen in a month's time, I'll start spiraling.
Exactly. It's a very important thing you said. There's trying to keep it under control and your mind not racing too far ahead. Well, there's this one last question, Deb, and I think this is a wonderful question, and one I wanted to ask you as well. There's a fellow SLL here.
Oh, we're quite rare.
We are.
We're only 10% of CLL. Yeah.
So anyway, and this is quite a relevant question to a lot of patients, actually. How do you deal with people's expectations when you don't look sick? And I'm so fatigued, I'm struggling to maintain community involvement while still working full time. Any advice to give?
Well, first of all, you shouldn't have to suffer from fatigue with this disease these days. Though that is a sign of treatment needed. I don't know, depending on your age or where you're at, but certainly I wish I'd allowed them to treat me earlier, because I have never been so fatigued in my life as in the run up to having chemo. And I put chemo off and put it off, and all the doctors were shouting at me to have it. And I couldn't even put my head in the hair basin of the hairdressers. I had to kneel on, and that's when I thought, oh, maybe they've got a point. And once I had treatment, I was well, and I could move my head, and I wasn't tired anymore. And I was like, oh, this is what it's like to be well. So first of all, if you're getting fatigue and any B symptoms, it can often be a sign that you need treatment, or you could be recovering from treatment. I don't know your situation, Peter. I've cut a lot of people out of my life. Do you know that? I have, there are some people are very good and they are there for you, and some people can't cope. And just don't need people that are not able to cope in your life, and surround yourself with people who care and people who understand. And I think it's very hard in relationships. I blame my divorce on cancer, although to be honest it was probably happening anyway, but I think if people don't think you look sick and they don't get it. And I know people with Crohn's, I've got friends with Crohn's that have this as well. People don't get it, and they say hurtful things without meaning to. They don't mean to, but when I was 38 and I couldn't do an afternoon meeting at work, I was so tired. Well, to give you some hope, Peter, I've had 4 lines of therapy since then, and I've never been as tired as since that before treatment. It was definitely the hardest time pre-chemo, and despite relapsing all those times, I've never been as tired again. So hopefully you haven't had treatment and you're going to get something really cool like ibrutinib or venetoclax, or if you can, ibrutinib and venetoclax in combination. I keep threatening to take them both, and Tom's like, no.
Do you Dr. Deb?
I know. It's a good trial.
Thank you so much. You're going to hang around, for a little bit.
Yeah, I'll be here.
We've got Clem Bayad's coming up next, and he works. Oh, I'll give him a bit more of an introduction, but then we can have a bit of a discussion after.
Yeah, I'll stay around.
Lovely. Thanks, Deb. That was fantastic. It's just good to get a first-hand